Can you believe how fast this year is going? It just blows me away. The more there is to do, the more there is to do, and the time just runs right along. So there's no time to waste is the point. And no one's going to do it for you. Now, what you're going to do, I guess, is a decision that everyone has to make. And I pause. That's a big point, because that means we have to decide what's most important. And I don't know what the real answer is between when you say your family, your friends, your beliefs, all that. Where does protecting all that come in? Does that come in first, or does that come in last? And so I stopped to think again. It's a big decision, and not so really big, and pretty obvious. If you don't protect your right to be able to make your own decisions, you don't protect you for being you, and you give over yourself to being taken down, you will be taken down. Whether you recognize that or not, whether you want to agree with it, whether or not you want to do anything about it. And you will conform your life to whatever constraints have been put in it. That's your freedom. Again, the freedom is a range of motion within a frame of constraint. It's not being free. And unless you figure out, finally give in to the fact you live around other people, and that those people and all y'all have decided that there's some so-called society you'll live under, some constraint. That's your freedom. And there's certain rules and regulations that go on. And I'm not talking about the propriety of their application. I'm just saying that they're there. You have to engage all that there is, and you have to do what you can in order to keep up with that. You can't deny your obligations and duties to have that happen. You might constrain your life into the little environment you've created for yourself that makes it so you don't have to engage that. But that's not going to work either. So I go through a lot of thoughts in my mind along with other things all through the week. What am I going to do? How can I proceed along this broadcast to explain to people what's really going on? Why I look around, why is the response so low? I would have thought that with all the information brought, there'd be some excitement to stop the pain that's hurting us and to figure out how to address it. And I get nothing but a lot of excuses about that. So I'm always looking for the reasons why. I wonder if it's me. I always wonder, is it something I'm doing? Because I can transmit the information, but if there's no receivers out there, we will have a problem. And for those of you receiving on past cast, prodcast, or recast, this will be BTW RLM 234. For those of you who want the content. So what we are listening for? What am I transmitting? What are you listening for? What are you tuned to? Is a common thought for myself. And it's not something I sit and contemplate really hard, as far as I don't spend a lot of time worrying about it. It's just something that concerns me, because we really do need to step up as a people. And I guess my other thought is, because this time goes on and I look around and most people, more and more people are getting hurt in ways, lots of different ways now. It's like the restraints are off on government. And we can talk about that, but there's a way to start to engage it. And until you do it more correctly, really, you're just going to be just a bunch of whining complainers. And that's not going to help anybody. It doesn't help anybody. It won't ever help anybody. So I'm looking to see, well, is it me? Is it what I'm saying? Is it how I'm saying it? Is it who's tuned into what? Maybe it's, we hear about the breads and circuses. I'm just not breads and circuses. I'm astonished at how many people, we were talking about last night, I made some comments in the RLM chat about the social networking. I'm just not in connection with all that. I just don't understand some of it. It's not very social for being social. And then it's really constrained. It's not something that, it's not something I guess I get wrapped around. I don't know I don't engage, I don't understand it, I don't do well. I look at people that have a ton of subscriptions or lots of plays on their stuff, and I go listen to that information and say, what can I do to get more people to listen? Because I do believe what I offer. I know what I offer is my experience. My experience has been really good in knowing that we cause change, the kind that you need, to get this thing recorrected, as Ron Stevens might say, to rock the boat. Well, we right the boat. We move the ship of state to where it's supposed to be, and we start to see it actually does work a whole lot better. It actually works a whole lot smoother, and there is a peace that comes about. Everything, as I tell you, that is my experience that I try to convey to you. Yet I would have thought people would have gone on, grabbed on to try in their own way to do that and example that to others. That I just don't see it. I don't see it in social networking. I don't see it in all kinds of places. Like debating on minds.com, trying to figure out, okay, I got these bonus points I've been trying to collect in order to boost my content. I got to sell it, I guess. I made it, but no one really shows up. And that's not true. There are some people showing up. So I'm thanking all of you that are listening, despite the low subscriptions. If subscriptions is what it's about in viewership, well, I need some more. Why I have very, very low, and other people's content I listen to is useless to everybody. Has just greater numbers. It's really, I don't know what it is. It's just an observation I can't quite get. I don't understand it. So again, before I move on too far into the whiny part of this, for the content that I provide to people that I know we use to great effect, notwithstanding anybody else's disagreements. Thank you for all of you that have been promoting the broadcast. Those of you on Minds.com that give me a I don't even know what they're called now. I don't get that close. It's a repost, a reminder for everybody. Anybody that's on BitChute, passing that around, thank you. Anybody that's in Twitter, thank you. All you folks that are doing that, anybody in the chats, thank you very much for promoting the information. I don't, again, this is not for me. This is not to be, I get thousands and thousands of listens. I know it's going to take thousands and thousands, and a small percentage of you will use that. And that, I know that small percentage can make the difference. That's why it's important to me. You're making a difference for you. And in that regard, you're making a difference for all of us. Because what we're looking at is not really cool at all, notwithstanding everything else you might have a thought about. And so, that's the reason why the numbers, it's not really a popularity thing for me. It's about, there's just it's just the same thing marketing works. There's just so many people that will actually engage. Well, this week, and I get off on tab, I'll get back to my tab here. I may have found out exactly, there's now a study, if we can trust these studies, about why some of y'all, most everybody, will not interest yourself with quality stuff, actually. You'd rather gravitate to the breads and circuses. You'd rather gravitate to people that are giving you sensational ideas, or give you things that make you yell at yourself or yell at your TV screen. And I'm not immune at all this, but I just realized at some point you got to put a damper and a limit on some of it and move on to the things that will help you. Put some time into those. But there may be a reason why, and a legitimate point to be made, and just another reality. Because those of you that are taking notes of what I say and actually start to turn around and apply it, you're realizing, as I see some of the emails as we work through problems here and there, just question responses, that you realize that there's people, they don't have a clue. Here's the law. You read the statutes everyone wants to condemn. It's right there. It tells you exactly what's supposed to happen. And you look and say, well, that's pretty good. And you start to apply it, and you go, yeah, that does work pretty good when you can hold their feet to the fire. It's the problem is that first of all, you had to hold their feet to the fire. And the problem is, did you know how to do that? And when it comes to the ultimate, they're going to drag their feet. They're going to dig their heels in the ground. Do you know the higher level of remedies that you need? And that now turns on the second point of what I found out this week in a little article that says, only 25% of Americans know all three branches of U.S. government. Now again, I just get to the point, I just read the study caption, I read to see how close the information is in the content, and that's good enough. I can read the titles, I can read the captions to all these titles, the titles to all these stories, and that's all you need to really know. 25% Americans know all three branches. Only 25%. Now, this speaks to a whole lot of things. I won't even get involved. I don't think I need to. And 25% don't think that you're part of it because you can name them. There's a whole lot of problems behind if that's all you can do is name the branches, you're still in trouble, and that's my problem. That's why I'll take you to task even there. You know the three branches of government? Does that mean that you know how to effect remedies within the constraints of that establishment? When it comes against you, do you know the other provisions that establish that government, the constraints on it? Do you know how to affect them? Do you even know what they are? That only 25% of America dwindles down. Who would be listening behind the woodshed to begin with? They all should be here if there's only 25% that know. They all should be behind the woodshed learning their lessons. But the problem is that means there's a cluelessness in society that I've been telling you is the worst thing a society can endure. It's cluelessness to itself. So only 25% of Americans on this poll, on this study, on this whatever they did, it was a small sampling. I suppose it could be adjusted a bit different. But they don't know the three branches of government. How are you supposed to address those in the three branches? And how are you supposed to identify, if you don't know those three, how are you supposed to identify the ones in the fabricated so-called departments of the government, like administrative? How do you know that they're even lawful? How can you even begin to challenge and identify a separation if you don't even know they exist? And this is our fundamental problem. This is probably why, and I look for excuses myself. This may be why people come and want like the breads and circuses. They like to be entertained. They have no concept in themselves. That's a problem for everybody. Did they even know that there's been a fabricated fourth branch? We don't know. If they don't know there's three, they wouldn't know they wouldn't know how to identify a so-called branch. And then that's a misnomer as well. And then we have other discussions that go on wrapped around all this. We go on, but the study surveyed 1,000 Americans. It was discovered the vast majority of U.S. citizens seem to be illiterate when it comes to U.S. politics and basic law. Basic law. Do you think they want to come behind the woodshed, learn all the stuff they don't know? Probably not. Do they have to? Should they? Absolutely, because this was a republic if we could keep it. We're told and admonished about that. And if you don't know that, you are then giving over to those that do know about that. And worse, the ones that know about that but know how to get around it, at least to your perception. It's that perception that I kill. See, we don't cotton to all that nonsense, getting around this stuff. But if we only have 25% of our population in America is cognizant of even how the departments of government are established, how in the heck is anybody able to deal with all the other things that have come to infiltrate inside of that, insinuating themselves against that lawful form? And then what is really anybody's complaint about it, to me, is just the mass ignorance promoting itself as knowing. What I talk about here regularly. Okay, so I could go through, I'm not going to read, just the whole point, this conceptual thing for me is really killing us. If we don't have more people than 25%, how are we supposed to keep a republic? What's the mass? Thomas Jefferson said what? We had to keep the educated people. They're not educated, and they're planned not to be educated, as I can tell you, as you can understand. Educate and inform the whole mass of the people. They are the only sure reliance for the preservation of our liberty. A long time ago, I figured out you learn to read these is what the people that were going to come to take you down will target. And now we see the evidence of it in this study. Now, if only 25% of you can name the branches, what about the fact of their implementation? How do you stop them? What's your remedies? I hear lots of people that research the Constitution. They know all about the Constitution. They impose their understanding about the Constitution on the world they see, not realizing it's not even that world, but they're supposed to be that way. Not one knows how to establish a remedy to assert, at least make a record and a public record of the failure. And then when you do, you blame many failures on the fact that, well, it doesn't work, and then you say, well, that's useless and go away. First of all, you didn't know if you did it right. Secondly, you're speaking to 75% of the clueless. And these are all real problems that you have to deal with. There's a lot of people that do not, I don't know if they don't like me, but they don't like me. And I just stay on a narrow path, and they don't like that. They avoid me like the plague. They won't do a dang thing I say, and they get themselves in trouble, and they look back at me and say, well, you suggested this other thing, and it didn't work. I said, well, you just didn't do that. You didn't do what I suggested. You did what you thought you did because you thought your knowledge of the Constitution prevailed against an occupation you haven't even seen. An occupation you haven't seen. It's transparent to you. And you hear the word transparency. You go through this all the time. You don't even know they're telling you they are the occupier and that you don't even see them. So you whine and complain about the effect of it instead of going after who's destroyed you. So I figure, well, okay, I'm going to put my hat in the ring here. Let's see if I know the three branches of the government, and I'm a little more educated. I realize that there's actually a fourth branch. So I'm going to tell you four, because I'm so smart. And I'll give you all the credibility you need in order to continue listening behind the woodshed. Because we know what we're talking about. Now, on a Twitter, I put out the answer. So it's in the ether forever. It's on the interwebs forever. And here's the four branches as I see them, because I'm so intelligent. I know it's not three, it's four. I should have got extra points. Here they are. It's the olive branch, the oak branch, the cherry branch, and the apple branch. Am I right? Well, am I? Activist found guilty of terror-related crime for refusing to disclose passwords to the UK police. That's the military. You now have to divulge your passwords in the UK. If you don't, you get to go to jail. But it seems to me this was a self-inflicted wound. I want to move on from our ignorance into how you start to watch how you're being played. I always want to show you that. Why is that? Because this oppression is transparent to you, and the players are transparent to you. Activists found guilty of terror-related crime for refusing to disclose passwords to UK police. Now, that's pretty straight up. The guy had to go to prison, and he is now found guilty as a terror-related crime because he had information on a cell phone. A judge in a London court on Monday found activist Mohammed Rabbani guilty of terrorism offense because he refused to turn over his passwords to police at a border search. A 36-year-old international director of British advocacy for Cage was arrested in November at London's Heathrow. The police had demanded he provide his phone and laptop passwords during an examination that was carried out under Schedule 7 of the Terrorism Act, a broad power authorities can use to interrogate and detain people in border areas without requiring any suspicion of wrongdoing. Rabbani said he could not provide access to his devices because they contained confidential information provided to him by one of Cage's clients about alleged acts of U.S. torture. The group, which was founded in 2003 to raise awareness about the plight of prisoners held in Guantanamo Bay, was planning to use the information in a pending lawsuit against the United States government. At the end of a quick one-day trial, Judge Emma Arbuthnot at Westminster Magistrates Court ruled that Rabbani had willfully obstructed police when he declined to hand over his passwords. Rabbani avoided a possible 3-month jail term and was instead handed a 12-month conditional discharge and told he must pay court costs of $830. That's for those of you over across the pond, it's 620 pounds. This means a Terrorism Act offense will be recorded on his criminal record, but as long as he does not reoffend within 12 months, no further action will be taken against him. Now, I can go through and discuss more and more and more. The point is, this is written by The Intercept. These are the people that are involved. Remember, this is Glenn Greenwald's boyfriend got picked up a couple years ago on one of these same deals. My other observation here with the magistrates' court, I understand the way the British court system, it's a little different. I think there's a Queen's Court and a King's Court. I think maybe he got into the Queen's Court, maybe. And the problem is that we're talking jurisdictional challenge. I don't know too much about that system, but if I've got even the basics of that correct, you're watching someone who did not do, even the Bundys don't do it, and no one in the United States does it, and ought to, but they don't do their full defenses. Notwithstanding that, this is a guy the Intercept knew was working in the field that was susceptible to a terror charge. They already knew that because Glenn Greenwald's boyfriend got picked up years ago. Now and I have a problem with this Intercept and these folks about setting up bad conditions, setting up things that perfect the government's position, and not do the right things in order to show people how to at least defend themselves openly in the more right ways. That these people knew this was going to come. They have all the technology, all the knowledge. Remember, these are the ones that do the Assange, they're with the Julian Assange, WikiLeaks, there's Snowden. They're all together. This is the Intercept, which came with the Omidyar. All these problem people. You can't tell me that they didn't know this was coming, that they even had a phone or had anything on the phone that they couldn't have just said, here's my not even had a password on the phone. Or if they really wanted to do something, have a password on the phone that had nothing on it to show that the government does this wrong, to make the point. Why did they go through that issue today with cloud computing? Why did they have anything on this phone that he would have to give a password for it? That he couldn't make his stand, say, I'm not going to give it, but I'm going to do a conditional give you the password that you are violating the law. Because he knew when they got in there, he would have just a default phone with nothing on it. Why didn't he set them up? Why did they walk into this thing knowing full well they were going to be susceptible, that they now have a terror charge for not giving, they've given the government authority now to have a terror charge for not giving a password? Is my problem with this whole thing. It's not even that it even happened. It's that it sounds like it's a setup. At the end of the report, that says they're considering doing an appeal. My view on that was you're only considering doing appeal? This is an impossibility at law. You have three exemptions. I think he used two of them. They weren't good enough, and you're not going to appeal this case. Has all the earmarks of a setup. To create the so-called precedent, because no one else is smart enough to figure out how to destroy that precedent, it creates a precedent that will now demand and be the example for everyone around the world as this thing ripples out about what the government can do regarding your free speech, your privacy, your ability to defend yourself, your capacity to address their affront, all these things and more. Why did they walk into this situation? If you listened behind the woodshed and you knew this was the fact, and you hadn't engaged the administration of that before, as I tell you to do for TSA, on the administrative side, and you didn't want to go that way, why would you walk into this jurisdiction with anything on your phone, actually? Why wouldn't you clean the phone up, mount it up to a cloud system, and walk through that airport with nothing on your phone? Why wouldn't you set the government up, knowing they would do that to you, to show how they are violating law? Why wouldn't you make these examples that are so easy to do? They had all the capacity. Why would you go this way if you weren't part of the system? If you weren't part of the other plan that sets up precedent against you, the people, the 75% that are clueless to this all and don't care anyway? But what about the rest of the 25%? What about the 1.0000001 that might know what to do with all that information if you are part of the 25% that merely knows the three branches? And my answer about the four branches, why are you still listening? I hope so, because I hope you know tongue in cheek. Now, most of you that are 25%, more beyond the 25% that didn't know I was wrong. I wasn't wrong. but I wasn't right. Why would they set this up against us, folks? Unless they were players. So my whole problem with this is, as I've tried to tell you, and again, here's an object lesson, folks. If you know, then why wouldn't you? This is almost like a game in my mind at this point. If I knew, and this is, well, I don't have a phone, so it doesn't really matter. It won't happen. I don't have a laptop. That ain't going to happen either. So I'm not going to be in the position to have to really concern myself about it. But those of you that do these kinds of trips and look forward into the future, you know you're going to be messed with. Why don't you set it up? Why aren't these people set? They have all the money to do so, to set this up. Why wouldn't you set these people up and just put the egg all over their face? Just embarrass them beyond all measure. Why wouldn't you do that? If I knew that this was going to happen, that's exactly what I'd be doing. For as much as I don't think I'd like cloud storage, if I had the ability to do a cloud storage that was secure, or even your own private server, set up your own private server so you can get your stuff off into your own server at your home or somebody else's third-party protected place. You would offload everything on your phone and then wipe it, and then reinstall a default system with really nothing on it. Why wouldn't you go through that and then set them up? Why wouldn't you do that? Is what I'm asking you to do in all these cases. Set it up so you're not in jeopardy. You don't go to jail when you do it that way, but you do now get the cause that you come back at them. If you intend to be a part of the solutions. And there's many of them. If you want to be a whiner, you want to be someone who just brags about what you think you do and think you know, you're going to do it elsewise. But why aren't we doing what we need to do to protect ourselves against this sort of this transparent tyranny is what it ends up being. With players that we all look and espouse, we put all these people on a pedestal, and they're setting us up. And if they're not setting us up, they're too stupid to be followed as into people that we should be respecting for their knowledge. They truly are too stupid to be interested in. We should be interested in. Why don't we look at it from that perspective? And if they're too stupid to this whole thing, playing off that they're not, what's wrong with us? So we got a whole lot more, if 75% of the Americans are clueless, and I would have to say that maybe the number's higher, because I don't think the test is whether or not you can name the three branches, I'll tell you that. I guess that's my other problem. But if most people are in that state, and there's only 25% of you that are not, well, what are we going to do to solve that problem? And why are we continuing, given such a steep mountain to climb here? Why aren't we taking every opportunity, wherever we go, however we go, to out all of this condition without giving ourselves up to it? If I had the guy's ear, he would not have been looking at a criminal charge, at least the way they got it from him. If I was on the intercept, I would have been doing two things. One, keeping my people protected, and two, making a story about it. How do you take these people out? They have the whole forum to do that, folks. They have the following. Why didn't it happen like that? Why does this guy now have on his record this terror-related thing, when he had every opportunity and had every knowledge and had every advice around him that should have said otherwise? Should be something you need to look at. And it should be something that you can see as an example, an object lesson, not to repeat. And this is kind of an obvious big thing back over in Europe, and it's not going to affect you. I'm saying these are this reduced to where you are locally is exactly how it works to take you down or keep you restricted because you don't want to make a wave. You don't want to make the point. You don't want to call out the harm. And that gets me on to something I've been working on the last few weeks here. How I'm realizing even people I know that do studies in Constitution and this and that and the other really don't have a clue about what they're up against when they go in to try and figure out well, their complaint is it's not working, and that's the limit of their extension. They see that it's not working. There's no other thought about how to go about protecting or stopping or exposing. And so this is this is a much bigger problem than the 25% that might know. Because all they know is those three branches. They don't know the next thing. And that's a real problem for me. The problem is I see a bunch of people, a whole group of people, fine people in the world are taken down, harmed, and continuously made slaves by these systems, these people who think they're keeping an order which is really just a felony against everybody. And they're doing by methods and by records that you accept every day, that they are, I just made the statements in a equity suit. They are fraudulent records used fraudulently. This is all the record, the digital data, big data thing that's going on around you in your life today, which you're not immune from. We found in the Equifax problem. They just make you up to be a consumer and have a record on you, whether you use it or not. This happens in almost every sector of society, from every point of government, every point. So why did these people go and do this to get this charge when they had every opportunity to make, and every resource to make the outcome different? Tells me these people, again, it's another evidence that I have to put them in the bad guy side, folks. And I have to then use the bad guy side to tell me, they show me how I needed to do it different. And I'm here behind the woodshed to tell you, I just gave you the basic example of how you could have done it different, and I'm saying you need to start doing it different. Not because you're walking through an airport, because you might just be walking down to your local county and having a problem with their next letter to you. That you don't walk in. When I say you can walk up, we have now the understanding of how to do things without jeopardy to us. Is, I guess, the object lesson here. That scared off a lot of people. You don't understand that. You're like the 25%. You're not the 25% that know. You're the 75% that don't know. You can do things. There is the remedies that you don't have to jeopardize yourself and get beat up like we had before, because we just thought, well, everyone's following the Constitution. They're not. You hear they had 3 exemptions in this one. The police could care less. The military could care less. And those people knew that and walked into that point thinking those exemptions were enough, when they weren't enough for them before. It's an insanity. And you can choose to accept that insanity and follow it like it has something to tell you and waste your time with it all. Or you can say, wow, okay, so they're players. They did it wrong. I see now we can do it better, and I'm going to have to adopt those things that do better so that I can be the guy or the gal that makes an example to those that just can't see. And they can't see because they've been educated to not see. So the education still becomes back and be a problem. Now, inside of that, they also have knowledge that, and somehow this doesn't rise to the surface. All this, another thing occurred to me, was that there's this technology we're finding out that there's people that write programs, and the NSA has programs, the CIA has programs, and private parties have programs that they sell to governments in order to use for the governments to get inside your programs, inside your computers, and have surveillance. I find really absent in that these people like Intercept, Greenwald, Snowjob, Assange, they all know this is there. But there was no backup. There was no discussion that they didn't need the password. It's pretty phenomenal to me. Well, these people know they have the secret knowledge that they are immune from this backdoors that should have been in everything. And here's how easy that was. Why didn't we hear about that problem? Why didn't we hear the big deal about like what the FBI did, having to go to it was said an Israeli company that breaks into iPhones? Why didn't that government do that to break in if that's what they had to do? There's so much wrong with these things on their face, given that there is programs out there that they don't even need your password, it seems, right? If they didn't just dump all their information off that phone and then default it, don't you think there's opportunity to get in these phones and put stuff in them so they have backdoors for surveillance, that they didn't need the password in the beginning, that we didn't even hear about it? Well, that would be national security. You're not going to hear about it, right? But how do we know it's not working when it's so pervasive? And we get this story that shows exactly how pervasive it can be. Are you being watched? Finn Fisher, government spy tool found hiding as WhatsApp and Skype. It's also in the VLC player and others. There's almost an unlimited amount of programs that this thing can be tagged onto. Now, I wanted to say, well, see, that's why I don't use Skype, but it has nothing to do with Skype. It has to do with taking another program and attaching it onto any program, and it becomes essentially a Trojan, if you will. The Trojan that works on its own. It's all transparent now. Why aren't these things being recognized as is probably just because they are being worked against you, and that's why it doesn't make that other story. That you have no real, I can't see how you have any protection about this. These are just, these are data loggers. These are completely data loggers, whether it's from your webcam or your keystrokes, microphones. They're attached through a subject, a compromised ISP or one that was set up to do so, to add a program with, that's transparent to most checkers, onto your programs you download from the internet, from Trusted Space, because it's going through a man in the middle. It's a man in the middle attack. The man in the middle, the device in the middle of your transmission is what's got the problem. Now, I was happy, in a way, I mean, I always destroy, can't handle, what, Microsoft is, and what they've become, maybe what they've become to our awareness. But it said in the report that Microsoft Defender already checks for this. And so I was a little pleased to hear that they were on the job. At least Microsoft tried something there. That was a third party, that was not within their group of, surveilled persons. And so they're already on the scene where at least they tell us, and this is the other point, at least they tell us that Microsoft Defender already checks it. I presume that a couple of the better checkers, virus checkers, will be on it. Probably Malwarebytes will be quickly on it. The programs that they attach to really can't protect themselves from this, and this is the other problem. But the point was that there's so many ways that we didn't hear anything about the fact that these devices could be compromised so easily. That isn't even a part of the prior story, which lends me to believe that the Intercept and their people and their reporters, as it looked like they in a story just recently, they're in on it, folks. They're in on it. We're being duped by them. We need to use what they're doing to explain to us how not to do what they're doing. They're giving us all the clues if we'll pay attention. And I come here once a week in order to help you in that regard. If you're not available to it normally, maybe you're too busy, maybe you got other things going, but this is all working as a slowly tightening noose on everybody. And so I suppose, as my thought seems to work, if we're aware of it, we have more opportunity to avoid it. And this is I think going to be one of the big secrets, an open secret. Just avoid it. Learn how to avoid. Do not engage these things that are gave to you. That included that Republic, it seems. It's all a setup, it seems. We're just now coming 100-something years to it, 170, 80 years later. We're now coming to the fact of the setup. And the players have all been the same there. And we're too ignorant of our clueless to this to understand it. We're all stuck in our own little worlds. And we think that's good enough. And then we complain when we get hit. It's sort of like the issue that I'm dealing with, helping a property owner. They got property, and I'm not saying that everybody does, but you're supposed to know about how to protect your property. Again, if you don't know about property, probably our property. And when it came to shove, they didn't know how to protect themselves. And then they're in a system that doesn't want to have them be protected, as the duties and obligations are supposed to be. But you plug yourself into a system, you don't realize that system took your stuff and converted it into something fraudulent to defraud you of those properties. And no one calls them out. And no one calls them out in a more proper way. And then we use things that I still have a problem again. Anybody who decries a fiat currency that takes on a digital currency as money is really kind of a fascinating joke to me. let's get our heads on straight about all this, and maybe we're going to get a lot farther down the road. But until we do it, I'm going to have to say that we're not going to prevail. We're susceptible to it's our human frailty as an animal that can't really work its way through its process. It just makes excuses. It's really looking for the easy way, the easier way. And people are tending to do things that is easy for them in the way they communicate. That social side. That's just aesthetics. That's not substantial. It's not going to help anybody. So, as I was been bringing up this question, as we move along, don't plug into these systems. If you do, know what you're doing. Use them for what they are. As I've kind of said before, I did say before, at one time credit cards were really, really kind of a cool thing. You didn't have to carry cash. They were protected. If you paid off your accounts within the month, there was no charges. You used it as a service that didn't cost you anything. That was the neat time to have credit cards. Then they started becoming the weapon that they are, and you indulge into what they do, what they are promoted to do to help you get stuff now you need now, you think, and pay on time. And that's how the trap goes. And they become the weapon. Is the same thing I think cryptocurrencies are right now. If you get into them and you work them for what they are, as far as the scam that they are, they want to get people involved, and the hype that can come along with profit, I suppose maybe that would be the advantage you would have. But if you walk into these things thinking it's the alternative, a permanent alternative, I think you're deluded. I think you're deluding yourself, and I think you delude those around you. It's one thing to use it as the scam it is and profit from its nature. It's quite another to put your eggs in that basket, if you will, or prefer it to another scam. And so I've said and been a little critical of the cryptocurrencies. It finally has come out that they're not really as anonymous as everyone wants to make them out to be. And how could they be when your systems can be tapped? You can download a program that has another program along it. We don't know how all this works. We just know that it is there. But it now comes out, and I told you that there was this shift going on, that the government was going to move into cashless, and that crypto made that possible. It really is a neat technology. It's the same to me. It's the same idea, only even more convenient at some level, given you have the support technology, the support electronics to do it. It's the tool that the credit cards used to be when you paid your bills off at the end of the month. Now, they still could track what you did, but my point was the convenience at the time. You're not putting yourself into a hole. You're using it as a tool. It was when at the same time I was doing the business of business. I was tried quite a bit of flying around, promoting a hotel refinishing company that we had upcoming and going. And there was quite a bit of expenses. Those credit cards came in real handy. I never went into debt. At the end of the month, we paid it all. I paid it all off, and I was able to. I say we, but it was I. I was able to use it as a tool. I never had to have so much cash around me with all the places I had to go, and that was really convenient. So cryptocurrencies, I think, is doing the same function, but they have the same trap. And they're even worse because it goes into another cashless condition. And I said the governments aren't going to like, I think as Ron Paul said, the government, or had a little plaque on his desk, the governments don't like competition. I said, so watch out. When the governments are going to be bringing in this cryptocurrency technology, the blockchain, they're going to be using it. And I brought up a couple of examples of how that's coming on, how they attach it to your property as well. It's in the world now. It's understood that can happen. The implementation takes a little bit longer, but we're understanding it all. So here this week, as we talk about this problem, the shift from cash to cashless and going digital, and that means you're going to have to be hooked on. You're going to have to be hooked in somehow. Governments are testing their own cryptocurrencies. I mean, I don't know what to say more. It's the progression. And for those of you that don't like government, why are you getting into something that the governments are getting into? Why didn't we look at the beginning and understand our law was based in land, which is the production of those things of the production, that looked at our coins, our silver and gold coins, and said, well, that's from a man's labor or a woman's labor or man's labor, and that represents property that we trade for other property. Why don't we stay there? Why don't we go back to that and avoid all this? But no, we don't have that sense in us anymore. Heck, only 25% of the people know the three branches, and I'm saying, well, you need a whole lot more than that than knowing the three branches of a government. That doesn't, just because you know that doesn't put you on any esteemed level either. But the people of Sweden are breaking up with cash. This is not even a new story about that, but they're telling us how it's progressing. The number of banknotes and coins in circulations has fallen to its lowest level in 3 decades. Riksbank, Sweden's central bank, estimates the cash transactions made up only 15% of all retail transactions last year, down from 40% in 2010, thanks in large part to a massively popular mobile payment services. The situation has left Sweden's central banks wondering, should the country introduce a purely digital form of government-backed money, and if so, should it use technology similar to that underlying Bitcoin? Well, I can tell you that the governments just didn't think, should we move to digital? This is the plan. And that's our problem. And we're going to plug in and let that happen. And Sweden's on the forefront of this. I won't read more of the story. The governments are shifting into digital currencies. It's not a joke. It's coming really quickly now. Now, if you're on the other hand and you're dealing in the fiat printed, you better not go to Vietnam and mess around with this. And I can't wait maybe in a way to hear Grammy Mary deal with this one. Here's the lead title of this. Vietnam sentences banker to death for massive dong grab. I'll leave that there and move on to the next story. So I keep this from going X-rated. The death penalty for ex-head of Vietnam Bank was the title from the BBC. They toned it way down. You don't want to go over there in Vietnam and do any kind of massive dong grab. That will get you killed. The former head of a major Vietnamese bank was sentenced to death for his role in a fraud case involving $1 million of illegal loans. And it's in the story right there. Don't go there and mess with a dong over there in Vietnam. It'll get you killed. They don't like you competing with their fiat currencies there either. And so this is one of the things they use that they'll be using as a reason why they're going to digital as well. All in the same week. Don't mess with the Vietnam's dong. Japanese banks are planning to launch J-Coin, a digital currency meant to kill off cash. So you don't mess with the dong, and you're going to be moved into digital currency. Japan's doing it. Japan was the first to identify and accept Bitcoin as a medium. Again, this is just a medium. Don't lose sight of how tenuous this really ends up being for everybody. The governments are moving where China has set it up, as the World Bank has agreed for China to do. And I've talked about this in the last broadcasts, so you can go back and listen if you want, or just go do the basic research on the progression of this. And off of Cryptagon, and then going to Reuters, chaos and hackers stalk investors on cryptocurrency exchanges. This is, again, telling us all at the same time, these things are vulnerable. Now, again, let's go back to that other broad program now that attaches itself to the programs you have. It's called FinFisher. Actually, I thought Fin. Isn't Fin in Europe in some place? Isn't that a currency or some slang for a currency? Anyway, maybe not. Currency hackers stalk investors. How are you going to be protected when you have programs that will get into your system and copy off what you're doing or watch what you do in your digital currency future? Should be very concerning to you. What they're talking about here is chaos and hackers stalk investors on the currency exchanges. The guy at Cryptagon says he uses Bitcoin as that tool I was telling you. He puts his money in, does the exchange, and gets them out of the exchange. So, but if you don't do that, you're susceptible to a third party, like a bank, being hacked. It's happened 3 times in a major way. So you then, again, like people who don't know their property, don't know the remedies, you don't know what can attack you, you don't know how fast you can lose your stuff, is the same type of condition that happens under this legalization of the cryptocurrency that's being adopted by governments around the world. It's a vulnerability I don't know how anybody can protect against. And I don't know why we don't quickly come to the terms that maybe this gold and silver coin wasn't such a bad idea. It certainly beats this fiat debt system. Do you think that the blockchain developed by governments, and remember, China just outlawed everything else that wasn't what they're putting together. Now, there may be people that want a chance using some anonymity process and program to get around that great firewall. But I don't know. Do you want to be the guy that's found out to be like they found in Vietnam? You want to mess with Vietnam's dong, that's for sure. It means death. And this is what they're telegraphing. This is what's coming down. This is how serious it's going to get. This will be like counterfeiting. They already put it into hiding as money laundering. So you have to be cognizant of the realm you're walking into. And they call this the virtual realm. I really always dislike that term. But there it is. People accept that part. You walk into this thing that you're not controlling. I guess it's what can I say to you? What can I really say to you? These things are set up for us to take us out. They've been taking us out. I look around the world. I got confirmation now. Maybe only 25% of you know the basics of what I'm even kind of talking about. I'm looking at things into the future that I've seen written way back in 20, 30 years ago. The conjecture, they said back then, or you look at it and say, no, that's a little bit more than just conjecture. This looks like a well laid out plan. And then you see legislation popping in. Then you see things happening. You see fulfillment of these so-called conjectures. Like the Twin Towers, evidence of the Twin Tower, FBI advancing the Twin Towers being hit by airplanes back in 1987. Coming to fruition in 2001, and no one makes any comment to that. Same thing here. You get into these assisted. Do you think the Bitcoin, or it's not really going to, I don't even know if it's Bitcoin. It's going to be blockchain technology. It's just a big, giant ledger. And it just has this digital currency, so-called, this digital merit that's going to be attached to it. They even call them tokens. It's like going to some carnival. But do you think it's not going to be in the debt slave system? And do you think it's beyond, do you think it's of substance? And if you do, I want to know how you prove that it's just electron chains. But we saw some of the effect of what happens as systems presume upon you. In this debt system, you have to be a certain good debt slave in order to get more debt. And if you're not, you don't get it. This is part of the big little secret that went on. I think this moving now into your digital world and your digital credit line. It'll be your digital cryptocurrency credit line, and a whole lot of things will be tied to this. And it already is, actually. If you don't understand how this comes and gets melded together, I want to revisit the condition over there at Equifax. Remember, this is all going to be, again, joined together. The debt slave industry frets over impact of mass credit freezes. And I want to return to this because this kind of joins up with what I was saying before about the fraud that the Equifax company was putting on giving you a service check for your credit rating for a year, and yet you are signing away your ability to sue them. The inside that story was the answer and the need for the ability to you finally cutting the ties with this system. They've actually handed you the reason why you should and the ability. Within their system, there's a thing called the credit freeze. I've reported about this before. I said you really ought to opt for that. It means you won't have a credit rating you can rely on. Apparently you can remove it, but it takes quite a few days. So the immediacy of your use of the credit is now is not available to you, and that's the thing that terrifies the bankers. That see, they work on your consumer consumption by your impulse. It's like impulse buying. That's what you're a consumer about. That this story through Equifax reminds us there's another world outside of the bank system that terrifies that system. Credit freezes on your account terrifies that system. Now it's coming out that because of what happened at Equifax, people are adopting that answer. It's a credit freeze. What the industry now is trying to do is persuade you to not use credit freezes because it destroys their system. They also admit in this story that it wasn't just 143 million Americans, which I told you at the time couldn't be. It was every consumer they've constructed. Anybody who's ever done anything in the system was in their system. But it also extended over to Canadian and British consumers. All are also been sucked into this big system, big sucking debt sound, the big stinking abyss of debt. You're all in it. You all have a name and number, and you all have a score, and you're all in it for the advancement of the banking system. That's what you've plugged into. This credit freeze terrifies these people because it allows you to back off. It gives you a time not to be such the impulsive consumer. You have to look around and actually look at how you're going to do things. I would say for those of you that are even the 25%, and some of you that are in the 75% that really are clueless but got a sense that it's getting tight. The pennies aren't, in fact, they've just stolen your pennies. You can't even pinch those. That maybe you should use this the opportunity to contact these three credit checking or credit data data miner companies that work on this to defeat you. In the very nature of the business that they operate, to support another plunderer, this banking and fiat system, you use this event to cut your ties. Stop using your credit. Stop being vulnerable to all this hacking, to whatever they decide, to even their plunder of you being the victim. They started to plunder you. Stop keeping this association with these people. Use this fact. I wanted to, the story here for me was to remind you, instead of being so obtuse about it, tell them you want to put your credit in freeze, you want to shut it down. And then don't go back to it, folks. Get it out of it right now. We're going into a time you need to start pulling yourself out of all digital frameworks. The constraint within that framework will be a freedom, and it's not a freedom that you're going to like because the constraint's going to be down to an electron, the power of which they can flick a switch to turn on and turn off. So, again, I'm back to that's just about as fickle as the fiat system that everybody wants to decry, and yet they'll jump onto this system that's a digital system that's even worse and think that's okay. At some point, I guess, if I was younger, I could think back if on my time, if this, when I was younger and had a mind for it, I suppose this would be a great game. This blockchain would be a great game to play. And it would be a great thing to see how so-called wealthy I could be. How could I use this system of how this thing works and the escalations of interest and the speculations? It's essentially just a Wall Street, right? The speculating on the Wall Street. I would use it for that. That would be the game I'd be playing. I'd walk in it would be like a casino. Only this is on the upswing of the casino, so you'd have a better chance of winning. A lot better chance of winning. In fact, any of you that are working on Bitcoin would know that. So to play it beyond that, I don't think so. I think to think this is going somewhere, to support it and be supportive of it is a very dangerous, it's a very short-sighted at least problem. You're being very short-sighted about the problems that you are going to be susceptible to that you're already given evidence for. Again, we're told by experts things that aren't so. We accept things because of some lack of awareness to ourselves, and even the excuse we'll put on ourselves so we don't have to. And I'm asking us to stop. And maybe because I'm asking that, I don't get a whole lot of people that want to continue to apply themselves as I'm asking to do behind the woodshed. Again, that you know. You say you know doesn't mean that you do. And I don't think I would have been as critical about that had I not been now focused on what I do to see that that's the fact in certain areas and fundamental areas. This is not what I'm talking about. What we do, what I do, is at the basis of the construction, of the continuation of this nation. In every place that you are, given the United States of America is definitely, there's no doubt, that it's the most unique place in the history of man regarding property, and that people can own it privately. And if you don't, and we don't, understand how to protect that, we're no different than any other nation that's been that had their property stolen from them by any number of invasions. And your property is tied to your money. If you don't know that, that's why I talked about the gold and silver comes from the soil based on someone's livelihood to produce it for you, and it has an equality across the other things that are made and produced in that way. The problem was that the governments took that and they adulterated that and they commodified that, so it's now a commodity. That's commerce side. And when you understand what I've been telling you about keeping it on this production side, that's on if I can use the word, organic actions. And if you transgress that and get into commerce side, you will now become subject to that system. Now, I wish people really understood this. This has become so critical and I say that it's critical not in a negative way as far as, it's a lot of work. Once you get this point, in fact, it becomes absolutely prevalent to it allowed me to keep focus on the last document I wrote for the people holding their property. It allowed me to see new things in the statutes that we decry. Oh, it's government corporate statutes. Yeah, right in there is the answer if you know what you're looking at. And I found another one. I found a way to show, it's just the way you start looking at things. I'd seen it before. It's not something I hadn't read before. In fact, it's one of the main sections because it has to do with administrative law. In the state, it's the administrative law, administrative procedures laws of every state, essentially adopting they have to be really essentially adopting the federal. And if you look close, you'll see that it's all federal, but it's commerce side. That within there is limitations. The law, the statute, the corporate statute's correct, but none of us understand that. That I went and re-looked at it with new eyes, focused on a particular point. As I tell you, if you don't do what I'm telling you to do, you'll never be, if I could say, blessed with an awareness to see the things that you'll find when you do that you can't when you don't. That within the administrative rules, I now have been able to see just bright. It's the bright beacon of the limitation of the administrative function of all states, even federal. And I only was able to see it because I'm holding fast with all my life and all my energy the idea that the United States has a distinction between its production, disposal laws in land and the commerce that it is eventually regulated by both federal and state. And let me remind you, commerce regulation, at least interstate, which is really diminished when the wheat case came up and they said it doesn't matter, the farmer on his land eating wheat affects commerce. That was a fraud, but that's what we live with at this point. They pretty well diminished the distinction intra and interstate. But remember, Congress regulates commerce. And so that's always going to be a federal prerogative. So don't think that your local state registered properties are not subject to federal law. Is the chasm I can see now and have seen, and I found it again within the limitations of administrative law. That is the things that are beyond your knowledge. You might have been thinking you're real proud about knowing the three branches of government. And they keep flipping that. Are they branches or departments? They don't know whether they want to be a corporation or not and tell you that. Division. Those of you that could name the three branches, weren't going to understand that they're actually operating underneath no branch. And then to see limitations again shows you something's still working to limit that. Otherwise there'd be no limit, would there? And so I'm asking people to start to actually apply what they think they know. It's not just looking out and thinking you see a deception and seeing that it is a deception. That's irrelevant. In fact, I was in the UCY chat, and I noticed when I was hearing, I think it was Helen talking with Ron Stephen about a witness, she said, about a political hearing, a political meeting for voting on people. And as I listened to that, and she gave me all the cause she had in order to sue them to expose this system of deception, this fraudulent deception on the electorate. For all of us that poo-poo that, to me it's a tool. There are people that vote. They are being deceived. That's a crime. That's actually a terrorism by definition now. She laid out her cause. She could have went to court. I asked her to go ahead and enforce that. The collusion of the people defrauding the electorate is something that every law in every country says it's protecting. Provides you a very interesting way to go at these people that have usurped the system. This election thing is big deal. Use these things as your foundation to move forward. You don't have to believe it does any good. You look at it as a weapon against those that are hurting you. Is how I want you to start seeing this. It's like, okay, now I have a whole new regime of addressment against not just shields, but I mean weapons now. I can show how the other side that's been attacking people doesn't have the tools that they claimed. And when they came under the color of authority to use the tools in the wrong way, those are criminals. They don't have to go really far. Someone was saying, well, can you say that claim in 2 minutes because these hearings only give you 2 minutes? Yeah, I can definitely now make a cause in 2 minutes. I can do it probably within 30 seconds. And all y'all should be able to, too. This is how simple this really is. It sounds complicated. I've been here for years talking about it. It's not. Once you apply, once you get past the 3 branches, and I hope you're noticing tongue-in-cheek, I'm not telling you what they are either. How's that? I gave you what my 4 branches were. That's going to be good enough. Every time I say that, you're all running that list through your head for those that care. Not coming from me. Why? Because it's irrelevant. Because you're dealing in a place, the usurpers took us out of all that. And that's the other deception. But elections are a really interesting way to get in at it. They want to make it look like there is a choice, like there's a democracy going on. There's a mob rule. A minority controls the mob. The mob is just this noise. The military knows that. That's why we know it's a military oversight. They want to make it look like there's nothing that interferes with these elections. So much so, it's become the main issue, remember, about Russians. Putin did the hacking of the American elections, became such a big deal. Well, another story here for you, but the experts say the reality is a lot different. And you see it when they try to eat their own, when one attacks the other, like one agency attacks the other or some authority attacks some other authority, and they're not going to take that lying down because that means if they accept it, they're like a scapegoat that escapes. They're just a goat. Clear that DHS was wrong. And so I want to point out this election stuff is very important, but you can really get into something with it even though you don't agree with what it does. It is something that's it's a cover scam to keep people asleep. And you get to use that tool. In fact, when you're not invested in it, it's easier to use that tool. Clear that DHS was wrong. California says Russia did not hack their voting system. So we got 2 problems. What if DHS is right and California is covering something? But let's just take it on its surface that the DHS came out and made a so-called bombshell statement, just I think last week, that said that there was hacking, implied at least, the statement implies, this is the other problem, that the election systems of 21 states around the country had been hacked, or at least were close to being hacked, which set off a new wave of Russian collusion, in quote, speculation in U.S. news media. Well, that's the fifth column, not the fourth branch. The U.S. media is the fifth column. Go look up that. You'll see what this is all about, or at least what I certainly think it's all about. The media is not the fourth branch, the press. The media is now, the normal media is the fifth column. And the press has been relegated to the bleachers and the peanut gallery, and no one understands the real press anyway, because they're only 75% don't know what the basic establishment of the government they're listening for is about. But California says the DHS is wrong. This is the Department of Homeland Security. If you don't understand the level of deceit in this country now, that should really astonish us how that's developed and blossomed, actually. That California is saying nobody hacked our election system tells me these election systems are one of the covers that you can use to pry the beast off its hold of your throat. When Helen went into in Kazakhstan, went into a hearing that was supposed to be for a voting of candidates, and you see a corruption because she identified the Delphi process, the Hegelian dialectic, as I will tell you better in my mind to say, to identify, it's a dispute resolution or consensus-based process that we know in at least the United States of America is a felony against anybody with the actual privilege that's being deceived by it. That's a felony and beyond. Now you get into election hacking in federal law, United States law, and you got to find this for Kazakhstan or even in England or even Australia. You will see this is serious encroachment. They don't want to see a taint appear upon elections because everyone is told that this is where you have your voice. It isn't, but that's what they told. That's why they don't want it they don't want to expose the fly in that ointment. You can use that to expose the fly in the ointment and the usurpation of that. You don't have to believe in it. You just have to be able to use that tool. So now we have the DHS coming out. You'd think that these would be the lily white defenders of everything, all truth and purity. No, these people are incorrigible. California's not going to take it, and I think they're covering up their own crimes. But here we see them eating their own, and we can see how important these things are to try and keep the cover of democracy, this cover of correctness unbroken. We can use that. A following story, yet another major Russian story falls apart. Is skepticism permissible yet? Well, I don't know. I mean, you don't have to be skeptical. This was a lie. This was a deceit that was created by the people in government, and this is being used to try and throw one group of people in a regime that's controlling out by another that lost control, and they're blaming the third party having. Well, we don't even know now what the point about Russia is. Certainly they must be messing around like any government. China must be, North Korea must be. In fact, I heard North Korea is getting into Bitcoin. They're taking all that coal they can't sell to everybody, and they're putting into generators, power generation, and they're running computers now to mine Bitcoin so they can make lots of money on this escalation of Bitcoin. And that's how that's how Korea is going to take out, they're going to create their wealth. They're using the system for what its scam it is. They're taking advantage of the correct side of it. But back to this, yet another major Russian story falls apart. This whole thing, even questioning the skepticism, that's a wrong position. This is also from The Intercept. We should be beyond even being scared. This is now the probable cause to believe there's major treason going on in a government. What is your expectation of justice underneath all this umbrella of crime? Is the amount of work we have. But the amount of work we have has pointers to say, okay, what's the Achilles heel to these things? We need to hit the Achilles heel. And by hitting the Achilles heel, we're also not going to come into jeopardy. If Helen out there in Kazakhstan looked at what she just said and identified this defrauding of the electorate, she could make an issue with that, and she would be protected by that, actually. Because this is going to be a self-evident truth that she presents as to the defrauding. You're not going to make a question. I've said over and over, you never present a question. Now, there may be a question, but it's really rhetorical. It's the answer. So that's a very subtle, be careful when you use that tool. But you never create a question. The equity paper that I authored here last week did not present a question. When it did present a question, it was to explain the question of the limit of what the trespasser was. In other words, if it had an authority, the question was placed to the court to decide the limit of that, but could not extend into the jurisdiction of a congressional grant. And the court was duty bound to protect that. I've just taken away the court's independence, haven't I? Because now I've told you also there's a higher obligation and duty that the court's not independent from engaging. It has to regard the congressional grants. It has to regard the congressional prerogative in commerce. It can't attach, or Congress could not attach against its grants. It can't touch production or land. Why are you all allowing tax records and accounts to be created that are in commerce and ad valorem or market attachments when those aren't reservations underneath the grant of the patent, evidence in the patent? Get back to the point here of this. Putin did it. Russia doesn't do anything. The story's coming out, and they're only asking, should we be skeptical? No, this is probable cause evidence beyond a reasonable doubt that the highest people in the United States are scumbags. At least, did I cuss? Nah. Did I offend anybody? Maybe a little bit. But I can't see it any other way. These are criminals. These are treason. These are people are committing treason, and we're crickets to it. And yet this is a key to what is trying to be hidden as being pure lily white and protected. They want to make the idea that your elections are the end all be all, and we have all the evidence that it's been all subverted. And I'm telling you, those of you that want to see that have a change happen, actually move it and be effective, that have had it with this nonsense, here is the points, the Achilles heel to the system. How you get at it. Now, Putin's not doing it. Russia's not doing it. If they are, it's been covered over what they did, what little bit they would have done. Listen, if 75% of the people in America, as based on that poll, don't know the difference in the branches, what relevance is their hacking going to make into any system? There's no knowledge. It doesn't, it's like, this hasn't been a non-issue from before the fact when you have a populace that is literally clueless to the hacking part of the information they would be told. Who cares? It doesn't matter whether Putin says it, Russia says it, China, whether some guy in the United States government said it, with some woman in some agencies, it doesn't matter. We got a populace that has no sense. But the evidence is out that it's not the attack from without. We have domestic enemies. And they're encroaching on this election process, which I'm offering here is the possibility to use as it is the Achilles heel problem. When you can see someone encroaching on it, you attack that encroachment, you will be protected. It's one of those places you can sit and not a question, absolutely should not be touched. And when it is, you've got somebody. Why isn't someone taking advantage of that? Talking about gaming the system and using the system. It's not using the system. You're outing the system by using the guidelines it was supposed to follow. You don't walk in with a question. You don't walk in with what you think you thought you knew. You walk in with what they're not supposed to do. It's not a question. You have not an opinion of what that is. You can state, and it's really copy and paste. That means you need to know those statutes. You need to go find their limitations as well. It's what I was pointing out about this rule. The administrative procedures, when you look very careful, you'll find out they can only decide in an administrative context a certain thing. When you apply that certain thing, it limits, it excludes everything else. It's really a fascinating thing. And to me, I hadn't seen it that way for all these years. I'd read these definitions. I had other ways to use them, but not this one. It just occurred to me as I've been dealing with this information. And so, you can use these, the limitations are there. What people aren't supposed to be doing, that's black and white. You don't have that as a question. All you gotta do is find where anybody is violating that black and white. That requires that we have to touch the dirty, tainted thing that we've been hating to touch all this time. Oh, those codes and statutes. Oh, that corporation. In fact, that's the truth. Now what? You're going to be harmed by it. Are you going to defend yourself from it? And no, that's another Achilles heel or not. So while Putin didn't do it, while Korea is using now taking their coal to generate power to run Bitcoin miners, and we hear this rattling of sabers going on about Korea and the nuclear potential. And you realize the real dynamic there. While the United States is screaming and yelling about all that North Korea is a danger about, and you hear sanctions coming about North Korea, Russians haven't closed their doors to talk with North Korea, and there is talks going on between Moscow and North Korea about how they're going to try and get this worked out. I suppose Korea will put its position. Russians aren't stupid. They know what the truth is. They understand that any nation has the right to defend itself, and if we've got a big bully, the biggest thing in the whole world, the thing with the biggest club is now pointing out that he wants to club you down, that you have a right to defend yourself at whatever it takes. So my thought was, why are we continuing to watch the biggest bully with the biggest club? Why do we allow that bully and club to continue to threaten people? If you're going to agree that people have self-determination, you're going to have to agree that Korea's got its self-determination. So Moscow is now talking with Korea. They're doing their diplomatic thing, and at the same time, we were told that Putin did it, and then Russia's done it, or whoever's been done it. We heard that North Korea let off a nuke. And I looked at they were all talking that the evidence was really from an earthquake response. And I looked at that and I said there's a problem. Up until now, I'm still not so sure about that. Korea came out and agreed that they had let one off, but there's still a problem with the earthquake. That my problem was that the so-called earthquake that was supposed to be caused by an explosion that North Korea did, is the big hullabaloo about all this stuff is going on. Looked wrong. It was after, it wasn't during. It was in an area that had seen earthquakes before, and there is a condition where the earthquake was too large for it to be caused by an atomic bomb. The seismographs were not of the proper framing and the proper character. They were after time. They were too large compared to the explosion. Even though they came out and admitted they did a nuclear test, there's now a watchdog group that comes out and says North Korea tremors were unlikely man-made. So here we have more people that are screaming and yelling that Korea did it, North Korea did it. They come and say, yeah, we done it. And why wouldn't you? Why wouldn't you take that as a correct, some kind of take advantage of the crisis? Why would you not take advantage as a nation to say, yeah, we done that, we're the cause of that. It would have been an earthquake too massive for that device. That we now have more information that it's very well possible that the seismic events were not the nuclear response. And so here we have, if we're not careful, we're causing a big problem, people taking advantage, with the chicken to the rooster trying to puff its feathers so that it doesn't look vulnerable, and it's going to cause people to make decisions that are going to kill millions of people. When we're not cognizant of that, and we don't take a more prudent approach, which I appreciate Russia in doing, not that I agree with Russia, not that I agree with what they do or their government or anything like that. They don't have the property law of the United States that I see makes us different and better. They don't have any of that at all, and they don't recognize any of that. So when I'm talking about how people are working in the world. It doesn't mean that I'm concurring with their existence and how they run their governments and all that. I'm saying there's a way that we work in the world. There's a way that we're supposed to do stuff so we don't be doing stupid things, and it looks like we're doing stupid things now. Somehow we went away. We went away from reason. And it's part and parcel to a lot of this, the infiltration around the world of the things we've identified that would be what you see infiltrating and imposing global governance. It's at a different level and on different things, but it's the very same insanity that runs the whole operation. And so we got to be very careful. Now, this watchdog could be a liar as well. The point is they bring up the idea and they have an analysis on some objective measurement tools that show that maybe in fact it wasn't a nuke. That they just claim, because why not? Well, but 6.3 we'll claim we did a nuke. We were talking about it anyway. Maybe their understanding of their geology is such they knew there was pressures coming up, that they knew they could utilize that an earthquake would happen. They could say they did a nuke. I don't know. But there's evidence that they didn't do it. The earthquake that you saw over there it wasn't man-made. It was a natural process of the earth cracking under your feet. And we were going to blame those people. And we were going to set up all the saber rattling and spending all the money to fly all this expensive hardware around North Korea to scare them some more, instead of having them come over and talk with them and say, okay, listen, we got a real problem with you folks doing what you're doing. We got to come up with some agreement. But we've got to do it in a peaceful manner. That I appreciate Russia taking in the diplomats and talking with them. As much as I appreciate Russia stepping in Syria and helping them on request to help them defend their country against the biggest bully and the brute in the world, called the United States of America, its allies, and its surrogate Israel. If we don't get this handled together, we continue our 75% ignorance, our 25%, actually it's about, I think it's 75% cluelessness, 25% ignorance, because there's very, very few people that know how to affect what the system has to offer that limits that foundational government. And I say that with all due respect to all you all that think you know something, because every day I look out, I see people who don't have a clue, even though they claim to know. These are colleagues of mine, people I've worked with, trying to help them understand, who came to me that said they understand certain things. And there's one thing about learning the Constitution. It's quite a whole different idea on how you affect the things that it was supposed to do in a world that's gone mad. In a world where the people decide they are the one who says what's right and wrong, and to hell with whatever you had a thought about. And this seems to be an insanity that's grown into the country United States, that I'm not quite sure how it got so fast. But if this is an indication, if it's an evidence, it's an evidence of how quickly you can lose your mind in a nation due to a very concerted effort to uneducate you or educate you in certain ways. One of those educations, again, in how the governments are established, is found in people. You look at outside the United States, the 75% that don't know the branches. Outside the United States, that people think that the Queen's just this figurehead now. And a little story popped up to tell us that ain't so, which I thought was pretty. In a way, it's funny. It's not funny because it's what's going on. It underlies other things that are also people are seemingly ignorant of. And I don't have any first-hand visual knowledge, but I have research knowledge about the existence of. Something came up and said that, again, in the formation of governments and how you can be told a lot of stuff and believe what you want, but there's a reality, and that the notice is out there that told us what the reality is, that Queen Elizabeth orders emergency general election over Brexit failures. For everybody who thought that the Queen Elizabeth was just this figurehead that didn't mean nothing, you better take a high note of this one. She's in charge of that place, and only to that place, because there's another thing going on behind that. Furious Queen Elizabeth is holding high-level talks with advisors and counsel over unprecedented constitutional crisis created by her current government, the Tories, who have reneged on their promise to make Brexit a reality on behalf of the British population. Again, I only need to read the setup. It's her government. It's her using the mob rule of the people voting and electing what they thought their will was in order to advance the cause that she wanted all the time that I identified to you. I said the Queen wants Brexit. It's going to happen. Now that they're balking and doing all this stuff, she's come out even against her own government to hand the authority for advice to her, to Jeremy Corbyn's view about replacing the government if they don't do this. Everybody's an advisement to her here. You see, the Queen is just not some figurehead. She's on the money for some reason. She has holdings around this world somehow. You're not, in Canuckistan and down in Australia, you have these governors that come in from her. They're her agents. They're the ones that talk local. She's in control. Anybody missing this is missing the whole point. You're just the 75%, like 75% Americans who don't know the branch of government. But what you're looking at, she's telling the serfs what's going to happen here. And now the extension is with the certified approval of the Pope since 1213. As I tweeted that out to Freakersball, as I think Grimner was even talking about this. You got to learn what King John did there. Go look at the documents, and you'll be on the path I found going from international law back in through there, and found out how all this stuff starts to work. By those that have the power and the requirement, obligation, and duty to recognize such things. Not you serfs, and certainly not you Americans, though you have the equal power, you just don't know it. That's the big thing. The United States of America, in the history of the world of man as we know it, didn't have the ability of men and women to have property which they could own to the exclusion of everyone else. Everyone else. That includes the Queen, the King, that includes the government, that includes your local commissioner, that includes the Pope himself. And I've figured out, as far as the way I research how this thing works, it goes through those grants. It goes through the identification of property, and who has it and who doesn't. So the Queen owns y'all. Here's more evidence. You don't like her government you voted for. She's all cool with it until it goes against her will. And then she goes upon your back, you people, you serfs, you subject serfs who make the democracy that she's protecting in order to use you as cover for what she wants. These people are brilliant. It's all the same scam that's going on everywhere else until people stand up and understand beyond the three branches of the government of the United States of America how we have the same power, each one of us who has property, to the exclusion of the king, to the exclusion of those that might think they're king. And then we allow them to be king, you've lost, and you lost your own self. You're gone. You're over. This is not an arrogance thing. This has to do with defeating evil, monarch evil, despot evil in the world. Now, despots can be pretty good. It all depends on how you treat it, I suppose. But the despot is a neutral. But we're talking about those things that come in to force people under a color of authority. That's why it's such a crime. And so you start to understand how this is all tied together. You can dismiss these statutes, but they tell you that people that come underneath the color of authority, be they the Queen, the King, the local commissioner, the police, it's a felony to try and interfere with your property. I've identified it as a treason, and when they stick it into the non-use, they put it in their hands and they don't use it, that's a war crime. How high-level international law this is violated so quickly. So, those of you at the point here, another evidence, if you were not paying attention, the Queen is not just someone who rides around in some carriage and has some people attend to her, and you just all love her because she's just a nice old lady. And she might be, I don't know. I like lizards. Oh, did I say too much? No, she's the owner of you all. And when her government, that you voted in, that she agrees to that vote because it's not going to matter ultimately to her. Doesn't affect her how she runs how you vote to run your, how them run your life. When she don't like it, she can speak up and she can do what she needs to change it. This hasn't been done. This is so rare. It hasn't been done since 1707. And the monarch uses their power to intervene politically. What did I say you have when you have what you have to have when you deal with things and you want to be able to deal with things like you possess them? You have to have power. The report here is not incorrect and imprecise. It says power. To use their power to intervene politically. That's just politically. Remember, sovereignty has many different facets to it. As I've told you, the United States of America was only a polity. It was only a political jurisdiction. It really can't be a sovereign. It does have enough power to do things with the soil, though, that everyone has to listen to. That was the big distinction, and if you're not listening to me on that, you're missing the whole point. Yet that will then not allow you to see what your remedies might be, how you go about protecting yourself. The problem is that you then think that you have you're up against a criminal and you fail. You think you failed. You didn't. You just didn't arrest the criminal, and you didn't show the record quite right. In other words, I can't get too much into it, but I got to be careful here, but if you didn't do your equity remedy right, if you didn't understand how to keep it purely in equity, you'll get run off the rail when you go in to get your remedy done and you'll lose. That's that simple. And when you know how to maintain it in an equity jurisdiction and they try to bring you off, you can bring the one who tries to bring you off into a felony. And you can communicate that without being accusatorial in the first instance. You don't want to insult. Really, the high-level international is never insulting anyone. It's always being diplomatic. And so, as you heard me say earlier, the document that I wrote gave room for the decision to be made, the limit of an authority. I said, never deny an authority. In other words, when you move in equity, there may be an authority the other one has, but not to the extent sufficient to interfere with you. And to that extent, it's stopped. And so this is a very precise look. It's not that difficult, actually. It's just having to take a very narrow and precise view and find the limitations on those, upon those that would come against you. Land is really simple because it regards a title, a title that can be produced, and it has to be produced in evidence. In fact, if you have a title and you go into an equity court and don't produce your title, you'll lose. If you move beyond the equity jurisdiction, you'll lose. And it's not that hard, it's just that you have to know that's what you're looking at. And if you don't understand property, you don't understand the way the government's constructed, you really don't have the basis from which you can yak and talk and whine that the system doesn't work, but you've never educated yourself sufficiently to be able to speak the way you need to do to protect yourself. And that's why you've been violated. And so this, I say again, that's on us. It really is on us. And until you get closer to that, we're just going to be a bunch of, it's not going to be 70, it's 75%. That's just the poll. That's just for the branches of government. It's going to be a lot higher number because we just don't know how to affect our property remedies. We tend to commingle too many things and concepts. In other words, like I've been explaining, and to make it simple for everybody and even the courts, which really the attorneys and the judges, because they're the same, they aren't taught in soil disposal laws. And why would they? There's never supposed to be a suit against a patent. Well, unless there's fraud in the beginning, and that's a 10-year term. Other than that, when that period of time's gone, there's no suit that can be maintained. Why would anybody look for a precedent in law regarding a patent land? They're not supposed to be attacking them. They're not supposed to touch them. They're immune from the judicial branches of government. Oh, I just slipped. I just gave you one of the answers. Did you catch it? If you don't know how this is separated out, how are you going to defend yourself? How is 75% of Americans going to defend yourself? How are the rest that just know those branches, how are they supposed to do that when they can't even look and see the distinctions? Is our problem in this country. How are you supposed to advance an equity remedy to stop it without that knowledge? Is our problem. It's their plan to make you stupid in that point. I'm pausing. I know I talk a lot and talk fast. There's really foundational failures in us. How are we supposed to do that if we are not knowledgeable? And then how are we that we think we are knowledgeable? That's why I said we don't know how much we don't know, but we can move along on what we do know that is correct, and we can make the foundation before. And as I was continuing to say before, trying to show people more simply, I'm not, and for the courts, I'm not combining. I'm making sure we don't combine an at-law condition with an equitable remedy because they'll defeat us there. I'm simply making the foundational step in the equity jurisdiction. Once that's established, given you can establish it, you then move on to the other remedies. Everybody wants to take too big a bite without any knowledge. And we're to such an insane position, I've realized you really, even with the system itself, you have to take a little smaller step. And that's actually kind of a neat thing because it's easier to figure out. In Britain, you don't have this right. And this is why I say I don't know about Canuckistan either. I don't know the extent of the property rights. It ultimately looks like it's all belonging to the Queen unless you can find a grant. If you can find the grant, then I could work with that other part and kind of equate it over to the United States. If you don't have an actual grant, then you have to look at the limit of what that is. And there seems to be more subject status to everything in a crown colony, in a holding where the Queen has the decision to decide what her government is doing when it doesn't move correctly where she wanted it to go, yet you thought it was doing the democratic process. That's just a cover. Again, I'm telling you how big elections are. The illusion of election is all powerful. In fact, again, we'll go back real quickly. Remember, the election is a franchise. When you go look up the word franchise, you see that's connected to a corporation. It's the privilege of a corporation extended by the authority, by the government, the jurisdiction. Franchises can also be a man, and this will include women, a man that adopts a legal status within a frame as a legal entity. They'll call that a corporation as well. And so when you adopt franchises, you're having to necessarily adopt that provision that was extended to you by an authority, under its authority. And that's the basic why, in fact, I've seen lots of people talking land, they talk about franchises. I think myself, and this might be opinion, although I think I can support it, I don't speak to franchises when I'm talking to property. Now I'm talking in the purest sense of the patent or a state land grant. Franchises are really the legal entity brought to a privilege. That's not bad if given you know the context. It's not bad to wield. That's a tool. It's not bad to have that tool when you need it for its purpose. But in the context of soil disposal, it's death, in my mind, to not understand what a franchise is. And that's what you have in voting, which means necessarily you're part of that structure, which we can identify as being, even the body politic is corporate. A man that has a legal obligation is a person. The man without is not. And this is on a case-by-case basis as well, which they tell us in the United States of America we are, which is another obligation and duty upon those with the property or rights to protect. You have to know this stuff. But in Europe, not so much, although they have protections, and those are like your citizens' rights or your rights, your constitutional, whatever the rights are that the authority has granted to you. That's the grant. That's how you use those. You use them as grants, not really as a privilege, unless they're just a privilege as I'd recognized by those courts. You have to understand the status of the right. The franchise, it's a franchise. You have to deal with it within the context of the franchise. If it's not, deal with it in the context of a grant. Deal with it in a context that pre-exists the government as recognized by the government in itself. And so a little bit of this kind of getting back into Europe now, And it's not European Parliament. They talk about Europe and European behind a tree. And, yeah, that's probably about as good as this statement, European Parliament. There is no Europe right now. There's the European Union. It's a union now. It's like any other professions union. But this is an important story, but it's got its own problems. Monsanto banned from European Parliament. Maybe it was caught peeing behind a tree. I don't know. But Monsanto has been doing some interesting avoidances or evasions from this Parliament. Now, this is not the Queen's government, remember? And this is why I told you that Brexit's going to happen. They had to pull the Queen out. The Queen's property had to be pulled out. I told you this long time before Brexit was really settled a bit. But inside the European Parliament, that's the European Union. They're not letting Monsanto in, and they talk to, if you're going to disregard our orders and our democracy that we've built, you do not get to participate. If you ignore our summonses to attend parliamentary inquiries or hearings, we're not going to listen to you no more. We're not going to take anything in from you, and we're not going to accept anything. You're not going to be part of this process. We'll do it without you. What I thought very interesting, why aren't we doing that in the United States? Because these corporations are those corporations subject to those franchises, subject to those laws. Why has it gotten out of hand in the United States? That the European Union gives us an example. It could be done here. And if you don't think it can be done here because you can't find a statute, well, you can make that statute to make that so. In this case, a corporation may not have any immunity from having to speak to the organization that gives it its life, into which it was born. If you're tracking, I'm kind of slowing down here. If you're tracking this, you start to see we're giving clues all the time of how this is supposed to work, how it's not working, and maybe if it's not working, we have something to work on. I just say it in one regard, just to say, here's some more things. I don't know what interests any one of you. Maybe this could interest you. Why don't we have the reflection that where people and subjects that we see the origins of the subjects, the citizen subjects, the subject serfs of the Queen, are going to have the Queen step in to redo their parliament. Here they've overthrown like a cold blanket. They put a European Union, like a big professions union, over the top of the countries, and now it has the power to not speak to the corporations. Why don't we have that power here? And if we do, why aren't we exercising it? I'm talking about here in the United States of America, that we suffer underneath these revolving doors in government, or we suffer underneath the regulations of agency, that we don't want to engage because it's a criminal system, we can't do anything anyway. That's storytelling you're telling yourself, so you don't have to do anything. Why, when we see these examples, why don't we apply them here? And if they're not readily applied, why don't we use them as the Achilles heel that we can use them in order to get them to start to work? I guess that's a question. Why don't we do that? I don't tend to get answers and responses in this, but at any rate, there they are. Why aren't we doing these things? Why do we allow, in one instance here, to show us that the Queen owns it all? She'll control what she wants to when it finally push comes to shove. They have the power. We find out that Monsanto doesn't have the power. It's just a legal entity, and it's subject to another legal entity. Now, there's a control structure there. How come it's uncontrolled when we get to the United States? Where we didn't, under property disposal, none of that comes on this. None of it. And then we get these stories, and I just have to shake my head. Everyone will be when you hear it, but it's, again, how we don't understand the problem. We don't understand the statuses. We don't understand the accounts that are made in our behalf without us knowing. When we find out, we don't properly address it. People were kind of astonished a bit, or surprised. In this paper I was writing, I went after the accounts. I go, why are you going after the accounts written in the property? Because that's the fraudulent information they're relying on. It's a reliance defense they have. Oh, this is the information we have. It's fraudulent information, but they're not told that, so that they continue to use it, and they have the right to do so. Well, why did you name the services company? Well, because it's a legal entity, and it's the one doing the action. It has the case. It doesn't have the right. It has no title to the property. It needs to be stopped. And there's no remedy at law to stop it. So we got to use this other remedy, fully within the rights of the property possessor. So we hear this story now. I tell you, we've got different rights in the United States of America. We're not subject to the Queen's determination of what her Parliament's going to do, or the European Union can't tell us what to do. And then you accept this over here in Florida. Florida residents warned they'll be ticketed for hurricane-damaged homes. At a time when South Floridians, rocked by Hurricane Irma, were still surveying the damage to their properties, the county of Miami-Dade apparently thought it appropriate to begin handing out safety notices. Now, I'm not going to go through the story. The point is that the status on the record is you're deemed residences. Secondly, you have a home. That's a tax home. Now, let's go back to your ad valorem taxation. It's built into a tax lot sitting in that record of the clerk. That's a fraud. You haven't told them that. These people have the gall to come and tell you that you need a safety notice. Instead of coming out with a truck to come help you and pick up all the nonsense, to pick it up and help you do it. No, they come out and they prey upon you. And it's all under codes that are international, and first federal and then international, that nobody seems to understand how to address. And really, how would you? You got your whole life blown away, literally blown away by a hurricane, and this guy comes up and wants to hand you a safety notice. Well, that's a notice so that we can deal with it. But are you really in a position to deal with this interloper? You don't even have a house over your head. And your fence is screwed up enough to get a ticket like this? A notice? Not a ticket, it's a notice. On a government that says, we need to do that? We got to put you on record that you need to do something. Is this a caring society? When you say you know, what are you going to do to stop it? These people are in the right thing, but this is what governments are doing anymore. Another story in Florida. In Florida, it's illegal to power your home with solar panels thanks to lobbying. Do you think Monsanto has been doing lobbying against your property rights? Do you think they have the right, or do you think that's a crime against you that you should step up and stop? Do you think that any of those solar panels are still around after Irma went through and scoured your property? Well, we don't know. We don't know what your construction was like. The likelihood is some things got damaged. Likelihood is if it didn't get damaged, you weren't going to have that there to use, and you were sitting on the Florida's energy infrastructure that failed when all the telephone poles got down, like in Puerto Rico. Big scrubbing pad that the hurricanes have done. When are we going to step up in our own property rights? Florida residents are warned that they were ticketed for hurricane damage, and the government, it didn't come to help them. They want to only make them notice so that we can bring things into safety. Safety is not the concern that was caused by that homeowner. Energy production for the use of the property is not within the states to be lobbied against. These are the things that equity would stop as a collateral attack on the complaint. It won't stop the complaint. You still have to kind of go that route, but you'll have to go into equity to stop this nonsense. Why don't you do it? If you don't do that, then you get this nonsense where you can't even have solar power for your house. And yet there's no law that I know across this nation, the United States of America, that can be actually imposed. They say you have to be hooked up to the grid. Are they going to pay you to do that? Did you assert a takings against the right not to? Did you have them produce the title to your property when they said that? Did you send in the note with the notice? Did you send in a letter when you waked up, when you undug yourself out of the house that was blown down by these hurricanes, and you made yourself a little bed, you lay down and you woke up the next morning and this guy's giving you a notice of safety for the fence? Did you write on the back of that, or did you grab his pen and say, I want you to produce the title to the land? I want to see your privity to this land that says you can do that? Or I want you to show cause how you're not the felon and aren't subject to immediate arrest. Did you do that for yourself? And if you're not doing that, I'm wondering why. Now, most people don't know anything what I'm saying here. Most of everybody doesn't have a clue. And this is the failure of our system. This is our society being fallen down. It's why we hear these stories. Because nobody knows to assert this remedy that sits right there in the Constitution everyone's been studying and think they know, and then would whine and complain that that's not there to protect them. The Constitution is just a piece of paper with words on it. You have to assert your rights. How many times have I said that? You only get the rights you assert. That means you got to go do something. They stick you in this commerce side subject to something they've issued. Or they make a record that they rely on that makes that so, and you don't address the record. This DHS that went about and said and lied about, supposedly lied about California, and Wisconsin came up. There was another report I didn't say. Wisconsin came out against the DHS report about the hacking. Well, DHS is here in on it again to hurt you. Federal again. This is all federal. DHS pays police millions to ticket and prosecute motorists. It is used to be the DOJ, cops, NHTSA, and USDOT are responsible for paying police to ticket motorists. Let me just point out again to you. Go into Title 18, Section 31, Sub 6 and 10, and you find out from the federal side, if this money is federal, go find your state statute that says when federal money attaches, federal law attaches, you're in commerce. Commerce is restricted to motorists that are using the highway as a business for profit. That's 18 U.S.C. 31, 6, and 3. If you can, all you have to do is get this fact on this first line of this story, and you can intercept, interfere, and obstruct their ability to come against you. Except you've allowed a record that's in commerce that you haven't yet attacked as a fraud, used fraudulently. An equity jurisdiction invoking the court will work to fix that should be pretty readily, or you've identified the other usurpation, which is the organized criminal syndicate called the Bar and its members. Different problem. But this DHS is finding it, if we're finding out it's not our friend. It never was. It was set up after 2001 in order to effect and advance into the war of terror, and using every crisis never goes to waste to interfere with you, and at the worst possible times in your life. As you see, there's no moral compassion, no empathy one for someone that would ticket you that your fence was not fixed after a hurricane has destroyed the house behind it. How these people in Homeland Securities pay the local police, and the local police are bribable. Here's another contention, that they're bribable to harm you, even though the jurisdiction of the federal government cannot interfere with your private travel or its grant of your use of the highway. Thank you for tuning in today. I hope something I said invigorates an idea, inspires you to go do something. Grimner, thank you for what you do at reallibertymedia.com. Let me be here, a blogcaster in the website and the chat rooms and all that, and over there at freedomsnetwork.com. And Didio, I hope you get your stuff done and helping those people pretty quick and get back. And Jules at UCY.tv, thank you for all you do there. Appreciate it, folks. And we'll be here next week. Tech diffs, and nature willing.
Well, that's another lesson. I hope with today's information you can take it to those that misbehave. From behind the woodshed, leaving his mark on the beast, this is Hal Anthony. Till next time, journey with purpose.
up a can of whoop-ass feels like.
Son, you just opened a whole case of whoop-ass.